On January 28, 1986, at 11:38 a.m., Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart 73 seconds after launch. In mission control at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Flight Director Jay Greene watched the telemetry data stop. The screens went blank. The room went silent. Around him, 30 controllers who had spent years training for every contingency were looking at data that had no contingency. He did not scream. He did not cry. He picked up his headset and said in the measured tone of someone following a protocol that exists because humans are not reliable when they are breaking apart, "GC, flight, lock the doors." Lock the doors. Standard procedure after an anomaly. Preserve the data, preserve the room. Begin the investigation that will take months and determine what happened in the 73 seconds that just ended 7 lives. That sentence, that specific, procedural, emotionless sentence, delivered by a man who had just watched his mission end in fire on live television in front of 17% of the American population, is the best description of what mission control actually trains people to do. Not to feel nothing, to function while feeling everything, to be the steadiest instrument in a room full of instruments when the thing you've spent years preventing has just happened and there are still decisions to be made and data to preserve and people on the ground who need someone to be certain when certainty is the only useful thing left. This is the job, from the beginning. Level 1, the Flight Controller Trainee, 24 years old, $67,000 a year. You have an aerospace engineering degree. NASA just told you it's not enough. You got the job at Johnson Space Center the way everyone gets this job, through an application process so competitive that the acceptance rate makes medical school look casual. NASA receives approximately 18,000 applications per year for flight controller positions. They hired 20 to 30. The acceptance rate is 0.16%. For comparison, Harvard Medical School admits 3.7% of applicants. You are 10 times less likely to become a flight controller than to become a doctor at Harvard. You have a master's degree in aerospace engineering from Georgia Tech. Your thesis was on orbital mechanics. You interned at Goddard Space Flight Center. You have the background. So does everyone else who made it to this room. The training program takes 2 to 3 years before you are certified to sit console, to be the person responsible for your assigned system during an actual mission. 2 to 3 years of classroom instruction, simulation exercises, on-the-job training under certified controllers, oral examinations, written examinations, and a final certification evaluation called a sim that involves a simulated mission with simulated anomalies designed to test not just your knowledge, but your decision-making under the specific kind of pressure that comes from knowing that the simulation is practice for a situation where the consequences are not simulated. Your first sim, you are assigned to propulsion systems. Your job is to monitor the propulsion system of a simulated spacecraft and respond to anomalies. The sim-sups, simulation supervisors, inject failures into the simulation without warning. A propellant leak, a thruster malfunction, a pressure reading that doesn't match the expected value. Your job is to identify the anomaly, determine its cause, assess its impact on the mission, and communicate a recommendation to the flight director in language that is precise enough to enable a decision and fast enough to enable it in time. You fail the first sim, not because your technical knowledge was wrong, because your communication was too slow. By the time you had fully characterized the anomaly and formulated your recommendation, the simulated spacecraft had passed the decision point. The window had closed. The debrief afterward is specific and direct in the way that only organizations where errors have catastrophic consequences can afford to be. You were 47 seconds too slow. Here is why. Here is what you missed. Here is what you need to practice. The debrief is not cruel. It is completely honest, which in this context is more useful than kindness. You go back to the sim. You run it again and again until the process from anomaly identification to recommendation delivery takes under 30 seconds, and the 30 seconds feel like enough time because you've run the scenario enough times that your brain has preloaded the decision tree. You are not learning to be fast. You are learning to be prepared enough that speed is a byproduct of preparation rather than a replacement for it. Level 2. The Certified Flight Controller, 27 years old, $85,000 a year. Your first real mission. The astronauts don't know your name. Their lives depend on your work. Certification Day is not celebrated. There is no ceremony. Your name moves from the trainee list to the certified list. You are now eligible to sit console on an actual mission. Your first mission, an ISS resupply flight, commercial crew, 4 astronauts, 14 days on station. Your console is For 14 days, you monitor the propulsion system of a spacecraft carrying 4 human beings and ensure that the system functions correctly, and that when it needs to function, during docking, during undocking, during emergency departure if the station requires emergency evacuation, it functions exactly as required. Nothing goes wrong on your first mission. This is the best possible outcome and also, psychologically, the most complicated one. You sit at your console for 14 days and the system performs nominally, and the mission ends successfully, and the astronauts come home. And you have done your job perfectly in the sense that nothing bad happened. But you don't know with certainty whether nothing bad happened because you were doing your job perfectly or because nothing bad was going to happen regardless. The difference between competence and luck is not always visible from the inside of a successful outcome. This uncertainty is the permanent condition of mission control work, and the people who handle it well are the ones who use it as motivation for continued preparation, rather than either false confidence or paralyzing anxiety. The ISS is 250 miles above Earth. At that altitude, a spacecraft is moving at 17,500 miles per hour. The station completes one orbit every 90 minutes, which means the crew experiences 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every 24 hours. When an anomaly occurs on the ISS, mission control has between minutes and seconds to respond, depending on the nature of the anomaly. In 2021, a thruster on a visiting Russian module fired unexpectedly and rotated the station 540 degrees, 1.5 full rotations, before controllers could intervene. From the moment the rotation began to the moment it stopped, mission control had 47 minutes. The response required coordination between NASA controllers in Houston, Russian controllers in Moscow, and the crew on board, across 2 languages, 2 organizational cultures, and 2 control systems that were not designed to interface with each other, but had to anyway. The station was stabilized. The crew was never in danger of losing the station. The 47 minutes felt, to the controllers who lived through them, considerably longer than 47 minutes. This is the job on a routine day. Level 3. The Systems Flight Controller Specialist. 31 years old, $105,000 a year. You own one system completely. The system's failure modes live in your head permanently. 5 years in, you are no longer a generalist controller learning your assigned system. You are a subject matter expert, the person in the room who knows more about your specific system than anyone else alive, including the engineers who designed it, because the engineers who designed it understand it theoretically and you understand it operationally, which means you understand not just how it's supposed to work, but how it actually works under the specific conditions of actual missions with actual anomalies that the design documentation didn't fully anticipate. The difference between theoretical and operational knowledge is the difference between knowing that a pressure valve should respond within 200 milliseconds and knowing that on mission day 47, after 23 thermal cycles, the valve on the port side has historically shown a 340 millisecond response time. That is within spec, but worth watching because the trend line over the last 3 missions shows a 12 millisecond degradation per mission cycle. You know this not because it's in a manual, because you've been watching the data long enough to see the pattern that the manual doesn't describe. The Apollo program produced the clearest illustration of what this level of operational knowledge is worth. On April 13, 1970, an oxygen tank on Apollo 13 exploded 200,000 miles from Earth. The mission profile, landing on the moon, became immediately irrelevant. The new mission was survival, using the lunar module as a lifeboat, navigating back to Earth with damaged systems and limited power, while the specialists in mission control worked through every system on every vehicle to find a path home that the mission plan had not included because the mission plan assumed the oxygen tank would not explode. The solution required 87 hours of continuous work. It required controllers who knew their systems well enough to find margins that the design documentation said didn't exist. It required a carbon dioxide scrubber adapter built from materials available on the spacecraft, duct tape, cardboard, a plastic bag, a sock, because the round scrubber canisters from the command module didn't fit the square receptacle in the lunar module, and the 2 people who understood both systems well enough to solve the problem in real time were both in mission control. 3 people came home. The system knowledge in that room saved their lives. Level 4, the Flight Director. 37 years old, $145,000 a year. You are the most powerful person in human spaceflight. For the duration of this mission, nobody outranks you. Not the administrator, not the president. Flight Director. There are approximately 25 active flight directors at NASA at any given time. The title took you 13 years to earn.
The authority it confers is absolute and deliberately so. The Flight Director Rule, established by Chris Kraft, NASA's first flight director, in the early 1960s and maintained without exception since, states that during a mission, the flight director has complete authority over all decisions related to the mission, not subject to override by program managers, not subject to override by the NASA administrator, not subject to override by the White House. The flight director is the final authority. This rule exists because the alternative kills people. The Challenger accident investigation found that concerns about the O-ring were raised by engineers the night before launch and overwritten by program managers under schedule pressure. The flight director rule is the institutional response to that finding. In the room where the mission happens, technical judgment has absolute authority over schedule pressure, political pressure, and institutional pressure of every kind. When you sit in the flight director chair for the first time on an actual mission, you feel the weight of this authority in a way that the simulations, however realistic, could not replicate. The simulations had consequences that ended when the sim ended. This does not end. The people on the spacecraft are real. Their families are real. The decisions you make in the next hours or days or weeks will have consequences that cannot be simulated and cannot be undone. Your first major anomaly as flight director, a cooling system malfunction on the ISS that requires shutting down non-essential systems to manage thermal load while the crew troubleshoots the primary cooling loop. The decision tree involves trade-offs between power consumption, thermal management, crew safety margins, and mission objectives. You have 23 controllers giving you data simultaneously. You have a crew of 6 waiting for instructions, and you have 2 hours before the thermal situation becomes critical if the cooling loop is not restored. You make 12 decisions in those 2 hours. 9 of them are correct on the first pass. 2 require revision when new data changes the picture. 1, the decision to delay a scheduled EVA by 48 hours to allow time for full system diagnostics, is questioned by program management, who cite schedule pressure. You listen to the question, you maintain the decision. The cooling loop diagnostic takes 31 hours. The EVA delay was necessary. The schedule slips 31 hours. The crew comes home safe. That is the correct trade. Level 5, the Chief Flight Director, 44 years old, $175,000 a year. You don't run missions anymore. You build the people who do. You are responsible for the mission control workforce, the training pipeline, the certification standards, the culture of the room that has to be maintained across generations of controllers who were not there for Apollo, were not there for Challenger, were not there for Columbia, and need to carry the institutional memory of those missions into programs that will go places no human has been. The Chief Flight Director role is where the technical work becomes organizational work, where the question changes from how do we solve this problem to how do we build the people who can solve the problems we haven't encountered yet. The Artemis program is sending humans back to the moon for the first time since 1972. The mission profile is different from Apollo in ways that require different capabilities from mission control. The spacecraft are different, the communication architecture is different. The international partnerships, ESA, JAXA, CSA, bring controllers from other agencies into the room, which means the communication protocols, the authority structures, and the shared mental models that make mission control function under pressure need to accommodate people trained in different traditions. The Mars problem is the one that keeps you up at night. At Mars, the communication delay is between 3 and 22 minutes each way, depending on orbital position. A round-trip communication takes between 6 and 44 minutes. Real-time mission control, the model that has defined human spaceflight since 1961, is not possible at Mars. The crew on a Mars mission will make decisions that mission control cannot influence in real time. They will face anomalies and resolve them before mission control knows the anomaly occurred. The authority structure, the decision framework, the relationship between the room in Houston and the people in the spacecraft, all of it has to be redesigned for a mission profile that removes the real-time connection that every previous mission took for granted. You are writing that redesign. It will take years. It will probably be wrong in ways you can't anticipate. The Mars mission will reveal those ways at a distance of 140 million miles. This is the nature of the work. You build the best system you can with what you know. Then you send people into an environment that will teach you what you didn't know. You bring them home, you learn, you build again. Level 6, the Director of Flight Operations, 52 years old. The room is yours. Every mission that has flown in the last decade flew through your organization. You run flight operations for the human spaceflight program. Everything that happens between rocket leaves the pad and crew walks off the recovery ship is your responsibility. The mission control teams, the flight rules, the 4,000-page document that specifies what happens in every contingency that has been anticipated, and the framework for responding to contingencies that haven't. The relationship with international partners, the relationship with commercial crew providers, whose mission control culture is different from NASA's in ways that are sometimes complementary and sometimes require careful management. The commercial crew transition has changed the room in ways that are still being absorbed. SpaceX has its own mission control in Hawthorne, California. Boeing has its own facility. The FAA has jurisdiction over commercial launch operations. The lines of authority that were clean when NASA owned every vehicle and every control center are now negotiated across organizations with different cultures, different risk tolerances, and different definitions of what nominal means. You manage these interfaces. You sit in rooms with SpaceX engineers who are brilliant and 27 years old and who have never worked on a program that failed catastrophically and who therefore carry a relationship with risk that is different from the one that Apollo 1, Challenger, and Columbia built into the NASA institutional DNA. This is not a criticism. It is a fact that requires management. Organizations learn from failures they experience. NASA experienced failures that killed 17 people across 3 accidents and rebuilt its culture around the lessons. SpaceX has experienced failures, Falcon 9 explosions, Starship test anomalies, but not failures with humans on board. The culture that builds around human loss is different from the culture that builds around hardware loss. Your job is to ensure that the missions that fly under your authority benefit from both cultures without being limited by either. The Artemis astronauts are training now. They will go back to the moon. Some of them will walk on the surface. When they do, the room in Houston will be watching. The controllers on console will have trained for years for the anomalies that are coming, the ones they know about and the ones they don't. You built that room. You built those people. Whatever happens in that room when the anomaly comes will be the output of everything you've built. Closing, the room that doesn't sleep. Mission control never fully closes. When humans are in space, the room is staffed continuously, 3 shifts, round the clock. Every minute of every day that a crew is off the planet, someone in Houston is watching the data, monitoring the systems, ready to respond in the window that exists between when something goes wrong and when it becomes irreversible. The window is sometimes hours, sometimes minutes, sometimes seconds. Apollo 13 had hours. Challenger had none. Columbia's crew had 16 days between the foam strike and re-entry, 16 days during which mission control debated whether to tell them, decided not to because there was nothing that could be done, and that decision will be examined and re-examined for as long as human spaceflight exists. Somewhere right now, a 23-year-old with an aerospace engineering degree is submitting an application to NASA's flight controller program. She has a 3.9 GPA. She has a thesis on rendezvous mechanics. She has interned at 3 aerospace organizations. She is one of 18,000 applicants for 25 positions. She doesn't know yet what the room feels like when the data stops. She doesn't know yet what it costs to be the steadiest instrument in the room when the thing you've spent years preventing has just happened. She will find out. If she gets the job, she will spend years preparing for the moment she hopes never comes. And if it comes, when it comes, because in human spaceflight it always eventually comes, she will lock the doors. She will look at the data. She will make the decision that needs to be made, because someone has to. And the room exists so that when that moment arrives, someone is ready. The room is always ready. That's the whole point.